Welcome to the Sagan National Colloquium in the 2021 Merrick Lecture at Ohio Wesleyan University. I'm Susan Ganassi, a member of the Department of Religion, and I've been working together with Matt Vollrath of the Department of Economics and Business here at Ohio Wesleyan. And it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome tonight Dr. Miroslav Volf, who is our guest for this evening. The Merrick Lectureship was founded in 1880 in honor of Frederick Merrick, one of Ohio Wesleyan's most distinguished presidents, and it is the oldest lecture series at the university, running near continuously until 1889, last year being one of those rare moments of exception. Dr. Volf is the Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology at Yale Divinity School and the founder and director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. He was educated in his native Croatia, as well as the United States and Germany. He earned his doctoral and postdoctoral degrees from the University of Tübingen in Germany. He is the author and editor of over 20 books and 100 scholarly articles, including Exclusion and Embrace, the winner of the Graumeyer Award in Religion, and one of Christianity Today's 100 most important religious books of the 20th century, and Flourishing, Why We Need Religion in a Globalized World. The main concern of his work is to explore the significance of the Christian faith for individuals and communities to live flourishing lives and for pluralistic societies. His recent book, For the Life of the World, Theology That Makes a Difference, is directly relevant to our topic tonight. In tonight's lecture, Dr. Volf will be exploring what kinds of lives are worthy of our humanity. We are deeply attracted to the idea of lives worthy of our humanity, yet find it difficult to pursue such a life. We spend most of our lives working, in the broad sense of the term, to acquire various means for life without having a clear sense to what end these means should be used. Dr. Volf imagines tonight's talk as an invitation to pursue a life worth living and to find meaning in our work by aligning it with the pursuit of a life worthy of our humanity. Dr. Volf, thank you for making the time to be with us.
Susan, thank you so very much, and Matt as well, for your kind invitation. And I'm delighted to be able to spend this time with you. I'm thankful also to all the members of this virtual audience. I know that Zoom isn't the easiest medium in which to listen to lectures. And so I appreciate you being willing to take time, as well as put up with this medium. You know, the topic about which I will speak to you is one that is at the very heart of not only my intellectual work as a professor, but also at the heart of my personal quest. I managed to kind of marry the quest of myself as a person with the work that I do, and I feel immensely grateful for that. I will be speaking here in two capacities, or from two vantage points to you. One of the vantage points is, you know, I should say from the get-go, I'm a Christian theologian and I have Christian convictions, and you will hear me speak about those Christian convictions, occasionally also referring to non-Christian, whether that's the religious or philosophical perspectives. But this is my home, and some of you who maybe not Christians might need to make some adjustments to your own experiences, the kinds of things that you find sources of guidance and sources of light in your life. The other, this is kind of a one side of my own conviction, so to speak. The other perspective that I bring here is of a teacher, a professor, and particularly one course at Yale, which I teach. In fact, I've started teaching that course and designed that course together with my collaborators. And the course is entitled Life Worth Living. What we have observed, and books have been written about this as well, what we have observed is that at many institutions of higher learning, the kinds of questions that we are raising in this lecture, questions of the meaning of life, of purpose of life worthy of our humanity, of life that is that is kind of a true life, of life that is a good life, all these kinds of questions which used to be at the very heart of university curriculum, gradually in the course of especially 20th century, even especially in the course of second half of the 20th century, they have gradually migrated to the margins of university interest. And in many universities, many other educational institutions, they're no longer even part of curricular pursuit, but they are somewhere at the edges, kind of student services kinds of things, take care of the human side of our lives, rather than that being also a matter of central intellectual pursuit. I'll give you just one vignette, one story of a young woman who came to the first time that we taught this class, Life Worth Living, who took the class, and then after the class we were trying to figure out how interesting that was or important that was for the students. And so we went around and students were quite excited about it, but I never forget what she said. She said, you know, the most important thing that happened to me in this course is this: before I came to the course, nobody gave me permission to take questions of what kind of life is worthy of my humanity with intellectual seriousness. Here in this class, for the first time, I had that permission. And to me, that was like my eyes were open, and I thought, oh my goodness. The universities originally were founded by people who thought this was the most important questions, and who dedicated most of their intellectual energies to this question. Just think, for you who study philosophy or in general ed, I'm sure you've studied Socrates. I mean, the whole trajectory of Western philosophical and tradition and culture was shaped by the figure of Socrates. At the heart of his endeavor, intellectual endeavor, was, we can put it this way, what kind of life is truly worthy of our humanity? Now, so I bring also to this lecture that I'm going to give to you, and I'll explain a bit more how it's going to look. I bring these two kind of sets of interests. One is interest, intellectual interest as a theologian, as a Christian, in Christian faith. The other interest is an interest in broader question in the university setting of how do we retrieve that question, put it closer to the center of our endeavors, the question of what kind of life is worthy of our humanity. And you know, the second strand, and partly the first, will influence the first part of my presentation. And this first part of the presentation, I will give you 3 vignettes and then try to pull them together for you at the end. 3 vignettes in which, where I will come from different perspectives to this question. One vignette is going to be on a life worthy of our humanity, and resources that we need to lead that kind of life. The other one will be on what I call the bread, that is to say, everything that we need to live, that satisfy our needs, and the kind of vision of a life that is truly worth pursuing. And then the final vignette is going to be on our striving and on joy, on trying to achieve versus recognizing the goodness of what is, and rejoicing in that. Now, these 3 will together, I hope, work to illustrate to you this question of what kind of life is worthy of our humanity. And then I will, in the last part, I will apply this to what that means for the way in which we do our daily work, whether that's immediately after we graduate, whether that's job in industry or job in nonprofit or organizations, whatever we end up doing. So that's roughly an introduction. I hope that kind of clarifies a bit direction in which I'm going to go. So first, my first little vignette. And I've entitled this Life and Resources. And here I want to take up this question of how resources have come to dominate our concern, and life itself has kind of shriveled in our interest in it, has kind of shriveled. And so here's my little lecture. As many see today, human purposes, human values, a vision of what the good life is, are not a matter of truth or falsehood. We kind of hesitate to speak about the true life, but belong to the domain of what you might call individual preferences or simply dreams. The domain of purposes and values. In the domain of purposes and values, we're free to follow dreams that we have, provided that we do no harm to others. Indeed, we think that if we didn't just follow our inclinations, preferences, and dreams, that we would somehow betray our humanity. And the idea is we ourselves, just by looking inside of ourselves, we know the best what kind of life is suitable for us, what kind of life is actually also proper and good for us. And we'll then change it when, as the time moves, but nonetheless, we are the queens and kings of our own life, and we make decisions on the basis of our preferences. Which a different way to say that is that the vision of the good life is a very private and very personal matter. It's ours not just to make, but it's ours without too much interference from everybody else to discover it within ourselves. It's specific to us. Now, so on one hand, this is about this vision of life, but the preconditions for such a life, what we need to have to be able to live a life like that, are not just a private matter. So we need to secure, we believe, resources that we might need for living our dreams. This is the main mantra that we tell ourselves and that others tell us. Whatever we end up choosing as our good in the course of our lives, we'll be better off if we accumulate certain kind of resources. That's what your parents, those of you who are students, want you to choose a college that would make sure that you would have these resources of life. Now, what are some of these resources of life? For life, this would be you need economic resources. You need money in order to live life, right? You need kind of social resources. You need friends, connection with people. You need to know people. You need cultural resources. You need to be familiar with what's going on in the world and how, at the level of culture, world functions. You need know-how. You need also something like bodily capital. You need to know how to not just comport yourself, but you want to look in the best way. That's why we do when we craft our image in social networks, so that we are perceived, that we project ourselves as having these this aesthetic bodily capital. And that's so from the kindergarten to hospice, learning how to secure resources and going about securing them claims most of our time and our energy. Now, but I want to say that something is off. with this account of the good life. That is to say, good life, it says, get yourself resources, and then whatever you dream end up being, you'll be able to pursue them. Then your life's going to be truly fulfilled. And what's wrong, it was expressed by a German sociologist by the name of Hartmut Rosa, who used an image to illustrate it. And he said, in a way, we moderns resemble a painter who is forever concerned about improving his materials, the colors and the brushes, the air conditioning in studio, lighting, the canvas, the easel, whatever else, but never really starts to paint. All his time is spent fussing around, making sure that the conditions and for his painting were right, so much so that it has swallowed up the entire time for real living of life. And that seems to me a very apt description of where we in many ways find ourselves. You know, the one of the main troubles of pursuing resources is, or concentrating on resources, one of the main troubles is that resources, which are means to certain ends, right? You create means so that you can achieve the ends, right? Resources tend to become ends in themselves. That's the situation of this painter. And we're familiar with this, right? Even if you go into gyms, you see people who this bodily capital became an end in itself, so that this is what the life consists of, to look in a certain way, to be fit in a certain way. Or we experience that obviously always in the realm of economics. Money becomes the goal in and of itself. This is a familiar old story where money, which is supposed to be simple means, becomes actually an end that we pursue for its own sake. And so that question of how do we negotiate between the ends, the goals that we pursue, what kind of life is worth living, and the creation of resources that we need for life. That is one of the fundamental questions. I mean, I have my own thoughts about it, but what I want to do in this first vignette is simply to invite you to think about this and ask yourself, where's the resource means for life for you into scale of value, and where is really the content of life that is truly worthy of your humanity? When will you start living and stop accumulating just resources? So that's the life and resources. Now, comes the next section, which I entitled Bread and Word. And here I build on my own Christian tradition. And some of you who are Christians, you will remember that at the beginning of Jesus's ministry, beginning of his public proclamation, he was tempted by the devil after he had fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. And the first temptation that he encountered was that the devil came to him and said, and he was in the wilderness, right, with a lot of stones there, and he said, turn these stones into bread. Remember, Jesus was famished completely. So now he wants Jesus to turn the stones into bread to satisfy this hunger. And then Jesus famously responded, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. So Jesus was actually quoting the Hebrew Bible. These words came first to the children of Israel as a summary of the main lessons that they had to learn out of their 40 years of wanderings in the wilderness before entering the promised land. They needed bread in wilderness, just like Jesus needed bread after he was fasting for 40 days. That was never in doubt. And we need bread. We need all these resources to keep ourselves alive, and they're symbolized in bread. And we need them just like we feel and sense a hunger. And they're as palpable sometimes, these needs, as the growling of our hungry stomach. But the fundamental question that was being decided in this temptation, and indeed I think this is the fundamental human question, is, do we need more than just bread? Can we be satisfied simply by the set of material conditions and experiences in which we live and find satisfaction to our own for our own lives? And the response of the Christian tradition is that, and indeed the response not just of the Christian tradition, but of the great philosophical and religious traditions, is that we need more than bread. This is, by the way, one of the arguments that I have made in this book, Flourishing, Why We Need Religion in a Globalized World. I try to make a point that that's what binds great religious traditions and also some especially ancient philosophies, that they think that we need more for life, that human beings are, so to speak, creatures of two worlds, a transcendent world, something that is beyond whatever is seen here, and this ordinary world. And only in the light of transcendence that our daily life, ordinary life, gets a meaning, gets a weight. And that was the kind of point of this, of Jesus' temptation, and which I want to make. But if you observe not just our individual lives, but if you observe also the entirety of our kind of public lives, and if you look at our major institutions, whether they're economic, political, educational, most of our social energy, and not just individual energy, most of our social imagination revolves around what you could call turning stones into bread. But it's really fascinating that both rich and poor, we are still in wilderness, plagued by certain kind of hunger and thirst, a certain kind of dissatisfaction. And I've come to believe that when we try to live by bread alone, there's never enough bread. Not enough even when we make so much that much of it rots away. When we live by bread alone, I've come to believe that somebody will always go hungry. When we live by bread alone, every bite we take will leave a kind of bitter aftertaste. And the more we eat, the more bitter the taste becomes. When we live by bread alone, we want always more bread and better bread, as if the bitterness of the bread came for not having tasted enough bread and not from living by bread alone. So this idea that none of the bread-like things that make that support our physical existence are sufficient is being underscored here. We remain restless, and this restlessness constitutes one of the major problems which we're facing today. So contrast between the bread, which belongs to this ordinary life of ours, and word, God's word in this case, but in other religious traditions, it is a kind of symbol of transcendence, something that is the frame and goal of our striving, or something that gives a meaning to our striving. Now, my third point is striving and joy. This kind of affirmation of goodness of ordinary life. You know, I talked earlier to you about bread versus the word. And that's has been historically described as a tension between ordinary life and also this kind of transcendent life. You see it in great philosophers, in religious tradition. And affirmation of this ordinary life and the importance of it is one of the key achievements of a constitutive feature of modern life. But what is really interesting is that in the course of modernity, you would have expected that we would have become attached and would have come to really enjoy, appreciate, and live in kind of delight in the world which surrounds us, after we've come to the point to say, this is the reality which really, truly matters. And yet, and here's the thesis that I want to present to you, alienation, kind of certain disenchantment with the world of ourselves is one of the key features of our human experience, especially in the 19th century. This was a very important matter of thinking, but as well in the 20th too. This kind of estrangement from the world, and different thinkers would give you different reasons why that is the case. For instance, Karl Marx will tell you this is a kind of a result of alienation. Martin Heidegger, a very different thinker, will tell you this is a result of our structural homelessness. Sigmund Freud would tell you this is a result of our narcissistic ego. And they all may give you different explanations for indifference or hostility even between human beings and their lived world. Now, of course, the world can be a very hostile place, and that's also something we need to take into account. And in many instances today, especially economic and political systems, are kind of not helping us feel at home in the world. But culturally, it's a very important phenomenon to observe that we as human beings define ourselves as kind of sovereign individuals who are in the process of achieving ourselves. Recall at the very beginning, I talk about this having dreams, but those dreams are about who we want to become, who we project ourselves that we are. We decide, this is our dream, and we are seeking to achieve ourselves. As it happens, we see ourselves as kind of sovereign individuals. Nobody tells us what our achievements should be. We decide about them. That's at least how we think about it. We then struggle for recognition in competition with others. And that creates a kind of hostile environment. I observe it, we can observe it in many domains of life. Take university setting. I tell my students, give illustration of this. My student, when they come to the classroom, and then suddenly you in the classroom, you have somehow interest, of course, each of us to achieve ourselves and to create a certain kind of impression. But there's always somebody there who knows more than you. And so you have to find different ways to kind of achieve yourself. But in every domain in which you find yourself, there's always somebody that's better than you, or you think that they're better than you. Somebody is on your heels, even that you're on the top, and you're constantly insecure and threatened by others. So it is in a seminar, in terms of when somebody has read about materials and so forth, and students try to impress their teachers. And then I tell students, but it's the same with professors too. Anytime we converse together, come together, somebody in this group always knows something about something much more than I do. And I always feel inadequate. We go into a certain conversation. I think, oh, I haven't read that book. I haven't read this thing. I haven't done this. They've achieved that. We constantly compare ourselves. And these comparisons creates insecurities and make us alienated from ourselves, because we always think of it in terms of our own inadequacy, make us alienated also from other people. And there is no way to win the self-achievement game in such an environment. It's just, it's created so that no winners, stable winners are possible, because the simple reason is that there's not a measure which you need to achieve, but the measure is constantly moving. And therefore, there's a constant movement and development. Result is, I think, that many of us very high achievers are often very depressed. Results is also that we can never remember when we last time truly rejoiced. And kind of one of the very important aspects, then this is our striving in competition, but how does one discover joy in life? How does one come to this point? And I sometimes do a little experiment, and its experiment is about it's connected to a story in the Bible, in Genesis, Adam and Eve and their fall. Let's imagine a world in which we have deeply meaningful work, perhaps garden to keep and to till. If you're into agriculture and horticulture, relations to our family and friends could not be better, and nobody's there to boss us around. No structure imposes itself on us in some kind of an iron cage. Imagine also that land is fertile, climate mild. We live in abundance, enough to eat, beautiful. It's a vacation all the time. In such environment, you might think joy would just come unbidden. We would simply rejoice. It's paradise. And now imagine that in that where you are, there's a in that garden, there's a kind of mound in the middle of that garden, and there's a tree that is bearing what seems to be exceptionally attractive fruit, but that you are hindered from harvesting it. That one tree, which we desire all the more because we can't get to it, we can't have it, even though its taste is not fully known, now becomes really the most important thing, pearl of great price. And we are willing to risk everything in order to get to that tree. Now, a Czech economist, Thomas Sedlacek, has made the story of Adam and Eve a lesson in the impossibility of joy. I'm not persuaded that impossibility is the right term. But at the same time, you can see that if you have the striving that is always there, how will you find something to rejoice in? Because whatever you have, it's always threatened. And that's why one of the most fundamental things that you find in the early chapters of the Bible is this idea of Sabbath. It's against, which is to say, I'll explain shortly what I mean by Sabbath, which is to say, arresting the striving and staying with what is experienced as good and affirming it as good and rejoicing in it as good. Now, as it turns out, our economy, I think, is largely joyless. There's a book entitled Joyless Economy. Our education is joyless. Our politics are joyless. Our entertainment is full of great humor, but is joyless. Our pleasures, intense and many, they're joyless. In all these spheres, we because we're in this competitive relationship, we cannot always wanting more, always better. We cannot find space to rejoice and to be truly grateful. And so when God created the world, he rested on the sixth day, and sixth day was then proclaimed everything he's created good, and then rested on the sixth day. And I've come to believe, and many Jewish thinkers think in the same way, that this feeling of rest on that seventh day is rejoicing in the goodness of what is. And this is an invitation for us to think, when have we last time truly rejoiced in what is without a thought of how we could improve it or what might be better? Indeed, in many Jewish traditions, it's forbidden to strive. It's forbidden to make things better on the Sabbath because you're supposed to rejoice in what is. I think that's one of the most important disciplines that we can have. Now, I have gone a little bit longer than I have planned actually on this, and hopefully this was enlightening to you. But I want to draw some consequences for our work lives from this idea that we need to have a sense of true life, and that sense of true life comes from our encounter with transcendence, and that gives us a sense of possibility, not just of striving 6 days, but also of truly rejoicing. Now, I think in the modern economies, the work has become largely a way to acquire resources, which are means. So the work is a means to means. We work to acquire knowledge, to acquire fame, to acquire good looks, and perhaps most of all, we work to acquire money, which is the most important means of all. And as a consequence, is that life, whatever life we lead, happens outside our work. And for people of faith, we often use the faith itself as a means to success in work. So instead of faith guiding our direction of our striving, faith becomes the means to make it possible to perform well. And I sometimes describe this religion as performance-enhancing drug, or religion is used to help us cope with difficulties, almost like religious Band-Aid. And faith does not give direction to lives. It doesn't structure a life. Doesn't give it a meaning. What it does, it simply kind of boosts whatever we are doing in any case. Some of you may have read read Nietzsche, and he's one of my, notwithstanding being critical of the Christian faith, he's one of my great heroes. And he speaks of God who limps behind enhancing and blessing what we do. It's a kind of poor God who does only that, right? Basically, instead of being kind of the one who embodies the ultimate values, he becomes a servant of our own little dreams and preferences. Now, one of the reasons why we do work like this is because we work within the context of an economy which twists things in that direction. Max Weber, in his famous book on Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, has noted that capitalism is deliberate and systematic adjustment of economic means to the end of profit. That's entire economic systems is organized around that. That gives a great dynamism to capitalism. Lots of goods are created in this way, and contribution to progress made. At the same time, there are also shadow sides, strong shadow sides of that way of organizing our economic life, and it's and the central thing is that economic acquisition and an entire economy is no longer subordinated to human ends, but they're run by the ends of the profit. So that becomes what sociologists then describe a kind of a social subsystem, differentiated subsystem, in which has its own internal logic of operation and which cannot be and should not be disturbed. That's why faith comes not to disturb the logic of operation, but somehow to help us participate with less dissatisfaction, maybe with more integrity within that system. I think that's important as far as it goes, but I don't think it goes far enough. A vision of life that's worth living ought to be shaping what happens not just outside of work, but what happens inside work. But it has a very hard time doing that because the purpose for which we work within the whole system is the work must be profitable. Maximization of profit ends up being that, and that puts pressure on the kind of work that can be done. Ways to work also, it puts pressure on ways to work. It must be competitive, and we need to maximize also the output to achieve that. And faith then, and our life in general, ends up from economic perspective, being there to enable performance in order to be able to achieve the goals that are internal to that system. And let me conclude and to say that one of the great challenges of our time is how to make our economic system more responsive to the needs of our humanity, not just to the material needs that we have, but to the needs of living lives that is worthy of our lives, that are worthy of our humanity. Now, obviously, our lives, human lives, will always require activities by which we acquire means to life. Work will always be there to satisfy these kinds of needs. And work will always be, in that sense, a kind of arduous good, hard good. And it can be an important aspect of our flourishing life, even in this hardness of the work. Yet at the same time, I think we should strive to structure our work and do our work. And those of us who are able to do so are immensely fortunate for work not to be mere means to life, but to be part itself of the good life, so that while we work, we don't have to bracket life and become the kind of the robots of our own servants of ourselves that have to arrest life in order to work so that they can then in the work outside, in the time outside, do work. Not just enjoy, but live truly a life that's worthy of our humanity. So that requires changes in the work itself so that it can be a meaningful activity, that it can be an expression of our humanity. But it also requires, and maybe that's going to come as a surprise to some of us, some of you, it requires also change in attitude toward work. Now, any work can seem inhumane to us if we'll feel forced to do that, to do certain kind of work. But we can give meaning to many forms of work that seem to us inhumane, and yet they need not be. They have their own intrinsic meaning. Indeed, some of work that seems to us inhumane is some of the most intrinsically meaningful work as a service to others. I think of those who spend a lot of time in raising children. I think of garbage collectors, which come once a week by my street. And I can name many examples of this sort. And I think, oh, what an extraordinary thing they're doing. They need to be valued, and worth needs to be placed on their work by outside society so that they themselves too can help to embrace this as truly something that's worth doing, rather than something they merely do in order to acquire funds, in order to be able in order to be able to live. And to the extent that work must remain mere means, I think there is an old dream that I still hold. I mean, 19th century and prior to that dream, but is resurfacing, I think, again, especially with the development of work-saving technologies, to reduce a time that we spend working. Many make those decisions. They lived intensively and worked very hard, acquire their means early in their life, and then shift into different mode and live the life that they actually want to live, rather than life that is required of them in order to have means to life. So, but it's possible maybe also to reduce the number of hours that we work, if we work in vocations in which we cannot satisfy our humanity in the work itself. So that the entirety of what I was trying to suggest to you right now is each of us trying to figure out what it would mean to align the work that we do with the vision of life for us that is truly worthy of our humanity. It bears time, investing time to determine and to examine, to study what is the life worthy of our humanity. That's why we devote this course, Life Worth Living. That's why we teach that course, Life Worth Living, and have students encounter multiple religious and non-religious visions of good life, which all claim to be true. And then we argue about them so that somehow our judgment can be schooled into what truly is worthy of our humanity. And obviously we'll make a decision for ourselves. And then ask ourselves, how could we structure also our work in such ways that it wouldn't be at odds with that kind of a life? Okay, my friends, I think I should stop now. I might have gone a minute or two beyond, 3 minutes beyond my allotted time.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful for all that you've shared with us. And what I'd like to do is to turn to the chat and read the questions that we have there. We have comments and questions. Our provost mentioned a comment about advice her mother gave relating to the ordinary life, about the pointlessness of comparisons, and that resonated with what you were saying. And now I want to turn to Amari's comment. And Amari says hi and goes on to ask, what would you say are the takeaway points from each part of the vignette that you gave as a whole?
Make sure that first was on life and resources. I would say make sure that resources don't govern your life, that there are resources to the life that you are confident is worthy of your humanity, and no more than that, that you don't become slave of resources. Reflect carefully whether on bread and the word. Reflect carefully whether pursuing kind of staying at the level of ordinary life actually provides satisfaction and fulfillment that you hope that it would, and whether kind of discovery of transcendence of God, or for those of you who think otherwise, other forms of transcendence may not be essential to live a satisfying life. And finally, make sure that striving isn't the only thing you do. Because joy will miss, you will miss joy. There'll be some joy in striving itself, but deeper joy will you will miss. Make sure to, I have a phrase, it comes from Dante, and I don't have time now to tell you how he formulated it in what context, but to me it's a really important phrase. And it goes, we long for what we have. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't try to improve. Striving 6 days, great. But what are the times when you actually long for what you have? Those are my takeaways.
Thank you. Now I want to turn to Matt's question. He asked, how do you think we can recognize if we are painting or just fussing about the studio?
Yeah. Well, I think you need to figure out what life is about. You need to figure out what should be the purpose of your life. I mean, and there are different ways in which to do that. I mean, often people do that at the end of their lives, right? They look back and then they make comparisons and, oh, had I only, or I see how little value certain things that occupied so much of my attention actually have had over the years. I can now, I can come to a judgment. Others, I mean, ask yourself, for instance, this question. There's a parable in the Bible about and Jesus gives about the merchant who saw a pearl of great price, or who saw treasure buried, and then went and sold everything he had and bought that. And this is an illustration for what matters most in your life. And you can ask this way. For what in your life would you sell everything you have? For what in life would you sell everything that you have to acquire that? You can ask that question differently also. What would you sacrifice your life for? So varieties of ways, and none of these would give you complete answer, and that's why we don't just teach the course Life Worth Living in this way, but we take actually what great traditions say about what kind of life is worthy of our humanity, try to delve into it and come to a judgment. Only when you know that, you will know that spending 6 hours, 3 hours a day in the gym trying to look really great isn't necessarily the most persuasive way to think what kind of life is worthy of your humanity. I remember this is I come from Croatia, and we were on the Adriatic coast and my niece was there, and they're right there, not too far from us, was 5 or 6 tall Dalmatian guys like the ones who do water polo, and they had these slender, extraordinary, beautiful bodies. And she looks at them and she says, I wonder what they're not doing to have bodies like that. To me, that's a really very important question. What are you not doing to have resources that you have? And ask yourself whether that might be actually a pearl that you are missing. That opportunity cost, life opportunity cost, is too great.
Timothy asks, you mentioned that only in the light of transcendence can our material lives have true meaning. Does this rely on a type of mind-body dualism, or can this be accepted in different perspectives, such as a Hobbesian materialist perspective and process interdwelling perspectives?
Well, I mean, it may be, you could, I'm not sure Hobbesian, right? Because Hobbes is a particular case, but you can see how you can have a certain kind of materialistic humanism, right? So Nietzsche was railing against a kind of idealism that is also in certain forms of materialism. Marxism would be a very good example, where you can have there's a kind of sense of transcendence, right? That is a kind of inner worldly, but nonetheless, there are kind of transcendent values that bear upon our lives and give it a meaning, directionality of history, on whatever that might be. I mean, if you have Hobbes who says that in all free acts, people desire only their own good, right? Maybe that is and power is the great kind of goal of life. Similarly, Nietzsche, right? It's possible that's also a kind of transcendence, but it's well, maybe that's too strong to call it that way. My sense would be that we need transcendence, and I realize, of course, that this is a personal opinion. Not everybody would agree. And one of my great heroes, as I mentioned to you already, is Nietzsche, and he would certainly be a kind of a great critic of that. At the same time, I suppose I want to say Nietzsche also drew consequences from absence of transcendence of any kind, right? And that consequence was, you're this little boat and you're in an infinite ocean. And occasionally it looks nice and smooth and amazing. But just wait. Chaotic waters are going to come up. What happens to the boat when there's no land? So that's his image in Joyful Science. I think it's a fragment or paragraph 125 where he does that. So it's a challenge to this.
Dr. Volf, I don't know how much time you want to spend with us. Timothy, thanks you for your answer and perspective. We have more questions than I can get in before 8 o'clock. I could leave it to one question or one more question, or what would you
How
like?
about if we? How about, I mean, I'm happy to go 5 minutes, 10 minutes beyond, and then we can end.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll leave it to you.
Okay, well, we'll certainly benefit from hearing from you. So I will take advantage of your generosity, and there are many interesting questions here. So Blake writes, years ago, there was a theological discussion of humans not as workers, but as players, homo ludens, huizinga, etc. Are there resources in the theology of play to address the alienation of which you have spoken?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think very good observation. You know, my own teacher was Jürgen Moltmann, and he wrote a book on theology of play. And I think there's precisely on this question of striving, that there's something about play that needs to be retrieved. For me, the striving and what I called joy, which is to say celebration of the good, of the goodness of what is, not striving to create something that isn't yet. Now, that to me, the two are not mutually exclusive alternatives. Actually, they, just as in Jewish tradition, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. You don't have to divide it in six to 1. You can think about what the relationship might be, but nonetheless, a certain form of striving seems to me appropriate. But we seem to have forgotten to rejoice, to affirm the goodness. It's almost like you're not serious as a human if you simply rejoice in something. You always have to be suspicious that somebody's trying to do something behind, that this is not enough. What is there, that it's not worth celebrating, and if you end up celebrating it, you're going to be look like you're a loser, satisfied with mediocrity, and so forth. Many of such I would call them excuses, because they take the alternative between striving and rejoicing as kind of exclusive. If you don't, then I think one can discover joy, but in joy, one can discover also play, one mode of joy, and the kind of delight that qualifies often play, a kind of non-instrumentality that is part and parcel of play, very serious endeavor, but non-instrumental. That too can be seen as a very important aspect of life. Indeed, I think there are also attempts to integrate this kind of play into the work itself.
Chad asked a question about higher ed, and I'm going to use my moderator's privilege and ask the question that I have. I'm going to tack it on to Chad's. But he asked, what suggestions would you have for institutions of higher ed to recenter a sense of good life and transcendence beyond the concern of resources? And my question would be, what would it take to restore the pursuit of the question about a life worthy of our humanity back in the university curriculum?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we have been, this is our concern. We of course realize that the character of modern universities have changed, that this kind of retrieval of what was in the past is not what we can maybe wouldn't be desirable to achieve, but that we somehow need to retrieve concern for the shape, discernment of the shape of the good life as a question of truth of our existence back into the curriculum. We've designed the program that is pluralistic, that takes different traditions, secular and religious, into account, and that's organized around the question of different aspects of life and how these traditions answer the question of what kind of life is worthy of our humanity, so that we go through the circles. Anybody who wants can look at the curriculum that we have developed, what we do with students. There's also a consortium, small consortium of schools that are trying to do the same thing. I think it would, and I think it would partly depend also on the institution, on the in what department would be hospitable for something like that. You might think religious studies department, but it's not always the case that religious studies department is hospitable to it. It could be, but it isn't always. Some schools have humanities departments, and ours is housed in the humanities department. So it will depend on institutional settings, as well as who might be interested in pursuing this question. But I can tell you, students are deeply interested in it. We have statistics both in terms of growth of interest, and it's very highly teacher intensive class way we teach it. It's not the only way to do it. And we have also data which show how significant it was in students' lives. So I think it could be done. It will take a little bit of initiative. And we have now, after 6 years of teaching, resources. University of Hong Kong has taken our model and teaches now for the 3rd year, and theirs is even larger than ours. So are also others. If you want to look up on this, take a look at the webpage of our center, yale.edu/faith. It's Yale Center for Faith and Culture, and you can get information and get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you. And I'm definitely going to do that. We have 2 last questions here. Sushanth asks, Dr. Volf, how would you compare Isaiah 60, Colossians 3, and Revelations 21 on finding joy in work in the context of what you shared today, since these allude about our work in this life being taken beyond this life?
Yeah, so I have, as some of you may know, I've written a book, 2 books on work. And in one of them, I have this idea, I asked the question, what would Gutenberg be if his press didn't follow him? Would that something of the identity of him be lost, right? And there's this passage also in I think in Revelation that our works follow us in the world to come, and I think it points to the valorization of work and of the results of work, of the cultural creations that we make, however we think of it then eschatologically. People have very different eschatologies, obviously, but it seems to me that there is a kind of a robust, at least in biblical tradition, there's robust affirmation of the goodness of what is culturally created. And that to me is a significant aspect of Jewish and of Christian faith, which I know, but I don't think that it would be different in other traditions. Other traditions can also valorize the earthly realities, even those who work with kind of strict transcendence, like, for instance, Islam does.
Okay, I'm going to conclude with Raphael's question, and it ends on a personal note, but it touches on what you've talked about, so it'll be very interesting. Dr. Volf, could you tell us a bit about how you view the relationship between vocation, calling, and work?
Yeah, so my sense is that and this talk that I gave could have been structured just in the way in which I'm going to say it now. My sense is that each of us has a kind of twofold calling. One is calling upon us in capacity of our with respect to our humanity. It's a calling to realize our humanity. In New Testament, it's a calling to the kingdom of God, to following Jesus, varieties of ways, or to true life, eternal life in John's Gospel, different ways of expressing that same thing. But there are also multiple individual person-specific callings that are also there. And that's how I think of vocation. Vocations that we have. We can have then within that a kind of specific sense of what we, given our talents, given our proclivities, given the needs that surround us, what is it that it is specifically our task, at least for a certain while, to do, to which we can dedicate our energies so that we can funnel through a specific activity the character of our entire calling. And that specific activity obviously fits within the larger division of labor in the world. But since we can do everything, we are limited by time and by space. We can do some things, and those some things can be for us specific callings, not just haphazard thing. Okay, so whatever I can do, I'll do, but something with which one resonates. You know, for myself, with 16, I knew that I should be a theologian, and had pursued this calling. So maybe I'm a little bit. I'm an old geezer. Normally, it doesn't happen this way these days, but nonetheless, that sense of a fit between who I am and the particular thing that I am called to devote, or feel that I'm called to devote my energies. Often I can't discern that by myself. I have to try things out. Others have to maybe indicate whether I actually have certain calling, or I've just thought that I have it. But in this kind of give and take of my gifts, my situation, people's perception, and what people are willing to take and receive from me, I can discern the calling and then pursue it with vigor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Volf, for a very thought-provoking, interesting lecture. And thank you to the audience for your time and for your participation. So with that, I think we'll conclude the event. Thank you.
Thanks very much to everybody. Thank you for organizing. All the best to you.
Thank you.